What is going on, people? You know what time it is. Another episode of Bleav in Mets. This will officially go down as the fifth episode of the new version of Bleav in Mets. My name is Casey Stern. It is good to have you on board. Today, a little short, a little sweet, but we're going to get into simply the Mets at the trade deadline and where they are now. I am curious your thoughts, whether you're joining me on Apple, Spotify, everywhere you get your podcasts, on our YouTube channel at Unfiltered with Casey Stern, on Twitter or X at Casey Stern, and make sure to like and subscribe and get onto all those places. Instagram as well, Unfiltered with Casey Stern. You can get me, Casey Stern, on Facebook. All those places will have this video. Wherever you are, you could jump in and comment along the way. I'm curious your take on the Mets deadline. I will give you mine on this show. I try not to be a pessimist, but I am a realist. And because of that, there are going to be a lot of people that always get on me in terms of Met fans because they don't think that I'm being positive enough. I am positive, but I've been a fan of this team a long time, in this corner, and then in this corner, and covering the game over 20 years. I kind of take that Met hat off, and I'm trying to look at this kind of logically about where they sit right now. So we'll see if you agree or disagree. Were they a winner or a loser? Somewhere in between. Thoughts are to come. In the meantime, as always, we tell you that we are presented by our good friends at Bet Online. They're your world's most trusted betting platform, number one source for everything online sports betting. Right now, you can get a 50% free bet up to $250 of your first deposit to bet on anything from the Olympics to baseball to Formula One racing. Bet Online's get every stat, every matchup, even live odds and spreads, all while the games are being played. When the game's over, you head over to the online casino, get in a game of blackjack or poker, and unwind with over 150 slot games. So head over to the website today, get in on the action, use the promo code Bleav, that's BLEAV. You get 50% bet credit, again, up to $250 on your first deposit, which is great. Bet online, the game starts here, and let me start here. Expectations are a killer. They're a killer with teams, they're a killer with trade deadlines. You will adjust how you feel about this deadline with the Mets based off of purely and simply what your expectations were. Did you expect them to go all in, push all their chips in, right? Prospects are cool, parades are cooler. Let's go for it. Let's go win a World Series. Do you think they're good enough for that? Did you expect them to go get Tariq Skubal, who was not traded? Garrett Crochet, who was not traded? Blake Snell, who was not traded? Or perhaps, maybe, the best starter who was traded in Jack Flaherty, who is now a Dodger. The expectations for me where I sat, pretty realistic. This team began the year with a David Stearns coming in, telling you he wanted this year to be competitive and to make the playoffs. But you knew that this was not about 2024. They weren't punting, but it was not about this season. It was about changing the tide of the way this organization had acted since Steve Cohen came in, which was basically, we're going to spend a boatload of cash, spend all Stevie's money, Uncle Stevie going to pay for everything, and that's how you ended up with a starting rotation with the average age of 70 that you had to eventually move and eat money to go get prospects, which thankfully a year ago at the deadline, and rightfully so, Steve Cohen did. But this is a team that is a surprise. Whether they belong or not depends who you ask. If I would have told you get Kodai Senga for like a start for 11 strikeouts and then another injury and he's gone again, and that's all you got all season, that Jose Quintana was your opening day starter, that you weren't getting anything on Lindor the first month of the year, you weren't getting anything on McNeil for almost 3 months, seemingly, and on down the line with injuries, Diaz injured, not good, then suspended, not himself, not to that level. Raley gone for the year, Smith gone for the year, all the mixing and matching they've had to do, and the list goes on down the line to be where they are and to be a team that's had the best record in Major League Baseball since the 3rd of June at 29-13 as I do this, I Bleav, is seemingly a miracle. And you have to take all of that into context and into account. Now, at the same time, pause that, because we understand 2 wild cards in the World Series a year ago. We know what the Diamondbacks did. Well, why can't the Mets be the Diamondbacks? They can be. They can be. But the Diamondbacks got into the playoffs, kind of snuck in seemingly, and then surprised people. The Phillies a couple of years ago, same thing. The Mets still are right there. So, as David Stern said on the outside of this deadline, afterwards in his press conference, our goal was to be competitive and make the playoffs, and that's still the goal. This deadline, to me, my expectation was what can you do to assert yourselves in the position you're in? Whether it's 1, 2, or 3 in a wild card spot, give yourself a chance to give this team, this franchise, the fans, a playoff season they did not expect because we did not expect it before the year. And certainly, mind you, didn't expect it after April and after May. I think they did a good job in that. Is it an A-plus deadline? It's not. I think if you land a Jack Flaherty type, sure. Skubal to me, Crochet, those guys were never happening. It's not going to happen. First of all, they weren't traded because they were held at a king's ransom, and it was only if you overpay me and give me the Jackson Holidays of the world, for example, who the Mets don't have. And even then, who knew, based on what I've heard, whether or not those deals were even going to get done anyway. And Crochet kind of taking himself out of the mix partially because some of the comments that he made about not wanting to pitch in the postseason, et cetera, without an extension. So there was a lot there, right? The Mets, to me, get an A if they land a Jack Flaherty or somebody who is between the Skubals you were never going to get and the Blackburn that you got. Because especially with Senga out, for them to really be a factor in the playoffs, and mind you, Mania, brilliant performance. He's been great. I mean, look what you got out of him this year compared to what you maybe thought you were getting. But for all intents and purposes, this team lost their ace again after kind of getting a sneak peek at what it would be like with him. And that is just a gut punch times infinity. So you had to kind of fill that role. And even Flaherty, not that guy, but someone who could be that guy. And they didn't do that. So it can't be an A. But I think for what they needed to do, it's a B deadline for me. It's above average. It's good for their mode of where they are and their modus operandi, if you will, which is we're not going to mortgage future, and they shouldn't. Because look, you know me, I'm all about giving up prospects and pushing the pedal down. But at the same time, you do that when your teams that are there, like the Dodgers who got Flaherty and made the deals to go get Rosario and Kopech and Edman and so on and so forth, right? Those are the deals you make, or probably you could have pushed the pedal down further if you're the Yankees. Maybe should have and could have pushed it a little bit even further if you're the Baltimore Orioles. I get that. The Phillies right there already didn't have to do it. The Braves with the injuries, not sure they could do it. Every team had a weird scenario with this deadline because there weren't many sellers. And by the way, I would argue the biggest winner at the deadline in total was a seller in the Miami Marlins. If you look at the haul of prospects that they took in and you look at the names they gave up to do so, took advantage everywhere that you can. And I think, Peter Bendix he was in his first year in that role, did a terrific job. But the biggest winners were probably the Marlins, the Rays, the Jays in a singular selling deal, maybe with Kikuchi and what they got, probably an overpay. And then you look at the Dodgers and you look at the Mariners and some of these teams that did a really good job. Padres did a really nice job bringing in Jason Adam and bringing in Tanner Scott. So, yeah, these teams did sexier things than David Stearns did. And this is not about, even for me, David Stearns being used to kind of Brewer land where they don't make sexy moves and they kind of somehow turn out well. I think he had a little bit more leash and leeway here, but he will have a lot more as years to come because this wasn't a year for that. They needed to be careful. I love the Winker move. I think clearly he fills a need. It gives them some pop, and from the lefty bat that they desperately needed, which will make it a much stronger batting order. And when he's on the bench, coming off the bench, a much bigger threat. And kind of, instead of robbing Peter to pay Paul, puts everybody back in the positions on the bus they should be in terms of on the bench. Adds some speed, runs the bases well. I like the Winker. Not a great outfielder, clearly, but I like the addition and what they did. That's the biggest move they made. And by the way, big bats didn't go at this deadline. You look at the list. You want to talk about, Soler and what he has once been. You heard about what Rosarena could be. You know about some of the games who have moved. There weren't really big bats that went. This was a bullpen-heavy, pitching depth-heavy deadline, even in the 30 moves that were made 24 hours into the deadline and 58 that I totaled in the week to 10 days beforehand. Adding in Maton and Stanek and adding in guys who have been on World Series teams, who have pitched at high leverage in the postseason, who, have some, moxie and swing and miss stuff and experience and all of that, I think was important. Sands, obviously, we know the Stanek, people getting crazy about his first appearance. But I think, for me, when you look at these two names, they're not blowing you away. But when you kind of tie them together with Zuber and with Brazoban, they needed options because clearly the back end of the bullpen, Diaz looks like Sugar's kind of turning back into Sugar again, but they really needed to increase the high leverage opportunities and abilities for Carlos Mendoza to work with that bullpen. I have no issues with that either. Did you want them to go get Estevez? Look what was given up from Philadelphia. Did you want them to go out and add a Tanner Scott? Right? I mean, think about some of the names, but look at what was given in those deals. Look what the Padres gave up. Tanner Scott's terrific. Hasn't been allowed to run 17 appearances. ERA is 1.18. But go look at it. You want to go give up a couple of your top 10 prospects to go make moves like that. The Mets are not in the position to do that. You could argue the Padres maybe shouldn't be. But even though I love what they did, because I love adding those two names for San Diego, that's neither here nor there for this show. You can catch my unfiltered breakdown, by the way, of all the winners and losers at the deadline, which is available now everywhere you get your podcasts. Go to Unfiltered with Casey Stern for that. The Paul Blackburn move is, here's the thing. If they get two arms and Blackburn comes in to replace Tyler McGill in your rotation at the back end, and you're thinking, okay, well, the guy was injured. He's only started a few times this year, but we know he throws strikes. He's going to give this defense an opportunity to play, which should be a benefit to you. They score some runs. He doesn't need to shut everybody out. And, he's a guy who's a veteran who you could trust and you kind of know what you're getting. Where Tyler McGill, really, let's be fair, you never know when that 8-run appearance in an inning and 2/3 is coming. That they're better off for that. And if Senga's healthy, you feel like, okay, that's an upgrade because I need innings at the back end because I got to win games with 4th and 5th starters in August and September to even get into the playoffs. Forget about who's starting game 1 and 2 and 3. You can't be thinking that way if you're the Mets. So that is an upgrade in that sense. But where I think it, leaves a little bit to be desired is that it's not enough. And I'm okay being in that category. I'm there with you. I'd like to have seen more in the starting rotation. If you told me Winker and they didn't get, want to overpay for bigger names in the back end, especially because you got the biggest name in Diaz and maybe kind of finding himself and Buto and what he's done down there, and the more depth you add in the rotation, once you get to a postseason, if you get there, you can bring arms to the bullpen and Peterson is left-handed or however else you want to look at it. Okay, then I'm fine with the bullpen arm side of it. The Winker move I like. The offense has been good. They didn't need much. They need Pete to kind of help carry a bit, and they need to stay healthy. And they Winker kind of fills that need in that role, in that hole that they had from the left side. The Blackburn part is like, it just doesn't do anything for you. Now, if he pitches well, now look, in spurts, he's been really good. You go back last, we've seen that, right? With Oakland, we've seen it. So it's possible. And he's a guy who I think, certainly also under control for next year, which is helpful, even though we're thinking about this year for the purposes of this podcast right now, because Met fans going crazy about having playoff potential. But, it's a small upgrade. It's a small upgrade. They're now going to lean heavily on Severino and Minaya and that group to give their best efforts. And you worry because when was the last time Severino had a good full season? How many years ago? Where he hasn't been hurt? How many years ago, right? Sean Manaea, a guy who we've seen, even though it was in reverse, kind of really great in the second half, not good in the first half. He has had a lot of kind of, halves of seasons that have not been good, not been consistent, right? And you can't have the Taiwan Walker thing of a couple of years ago where you get great in the first half and then drop off because you don't have guys to lean on. At the time you had Scherzer and company and DeGrom at the time years ago. You don't have any of that now. These are the guys you got to rely on. There's fear in that for me. The starting rotation, I have some issue with. I have concerns about. I'm curious your comments and thoughts. I don't think, though, you could say it's bad. It was overall a good deadline because, again, going back to where I was, you can't lose your position of we can win a wild card and we can make the playoffs. And they didn't lose that position. They certainly didn't get any worse. They didn't sell. Winker's an upgrade. even the bullpen arms on their own will be an upgrade in terms of opportunities to not overtax Diaz, who now you're finding you're having to go 4 or 5 outs all the time. And I got to worry about that now the rest of the year. And, Carlos Mendoza's got to handle that and handle that well. Not an easy thing to do because you're going to want to lean on him as much as you can. And you got to be careful, right? So it's a little better. Blackburn's a little bit of an upgrade. You might get some, lightning in a bottle out of him where, he comes over and is able to perform great the rest of the year. In spurts, he can do that. If he stays healthy, he'll give you innings. And really, that's more than anything what they need. Because unlike other Met teams in the past, you go back a couple of years ago, who the hell is going to score for Jacob deGrom when he pitches? Now you're looking for a depth of a staff to keep you in the game long enough for your offense to win you a game. It's a totally different way of thinking. And that to me is why the Winker move clearly sets as the biggest thing the Mets did. And it was a really good move, in my opinion, for them to make. And I think he'll be a good fit in the room. And I think he'll be a good fit at the plate as well. Curious your thoughts on where you sit on the Mets deadline. Did they do enough? I know expectations for you Met fans were high. Let me know. Get me on Twitter or X at Casey Stern. We will have much more on Bleav in Mets, many more guests along the way. If you have not heard or seen, we've already had Steve Phillips and John Gibbons and Jim Duquette. We'll have many more along the way. I've got others in the hopper that are coming. We'll keep those and keep you posted as we continue on Bleav